Rotation and lateral bending of the lumbar spine.
Rotation and lateral bending of the lumbar spine in the prone position. We're first going to look at rotation. The easiest way to remember on what with regards to the lumbar spine, remember just the lumbar spine, is whatever motion you're going to assess, left rotation or left lateral bending, right rotation or right lateral bending, whatever motion is called for you, stand physically on that side of your patient. I'm standing to the left of the patient right now, and that's why we're going to assess both left rotation and left lateral bending. Classically, for the examination, we'll be giving you L3 is going to be the segment in mind. So you have to be able to anatomically locate L3. With regards to the lumbar spine for rotation, we have two potential segmental contact points. That choice is up to you. We can either contact the spinous process, or we can contact the mammillary process. We'll go through each. So to assess left rotation of L3 in the prone position, I physically stand at the patient's left side. Anatomically, I'm going to locate that segmental contact point. Now, whether you want to come from landmarks or whether you want to come from shortcuts, once again, that is up to you. I'm going to use a shortcut using the iliac crest. So I'm going to palpate down to the iliac crest. I'm going to bisect the iliac crest. That's going to give me the spinous process of L4. From here, I'm going to palpate superiorly one spinous process. Using a spinous process contact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thumb contact of my superior hand. I'm going to contact the lateral aspect of the left side of the spinous process of L3. Yet I'm going to let the tip of my hand cross over the inner space and feel the spinous of L4. What's nice about this is you can actually feel the relative movement that takes place between the segment. There's two things we're assessing here. We're assessing both joint play and end feel. Joint play is the movement that takes place between neutral and pretension. End play, we first have to bring the joint to pretension, and then we want to spring through the resiliency to feel the resiliency of the tissue. So I have my fingertip on the lateral aspect, the left side of the spinous process of L3. I'm letting my fingertips spy across the inner space onto L4. With my inferior hand, I'm going to reach across and grab the patient's ASIS. Good doctor's positioning would be for this one is to kick back the rear leg, because this way I can use my body to rotate the pelvis instead of having to pull it with just my arm. As you begin to rotate the pelvis, you should feel the following. If you have normal joint play, and you can actually probably see it in the film here, L4 will begin to rotate relative to L3. So I should feel the spinuses separate in my fingers. How far do you rotate? We rotate till we bring the joint to pretension. How will you know when the joint's in pretension? Because as soon as L4 begins to rotate and it locks onto L3, L3 is now going to want to rotate. So as soon as I feel L3 rotate into my thumb contact, whether I felt separation or not, is telling me this joint is at pretension. So as soon as I feel L3 rotate into my hand, to assess end feel, I'm going to do one of three things. I'm either going to stabilize the pelvis and spring lateral to medial into the spinous of L3. I'm going to stabilize L3 and pull a little bit, rotate the pelvis a little farther. Or I can do a combination of both these together. Most students we've talked to over the trimester say they tend to feel more when they stabilize L3 and they pull a little bit more through the pelvis, which you'll feel. In a normal moving joint, I should feel, in joint play, I should feel separation. And end feel, not only should I feel a little bit more separation when I spring, but it'll also feel like a rubber band. It's both resilient. It both stretches and recoils back when I let go. That would imply normal. What you'll often feel when a joint is restricted is, I don't feel relatively little, if any, joint play. In other words, the two spinuses feel like they rotate together. As soon as L3 comes into my finger, I'm at pretension. When you go to spring, you may feel little, if none, separation, and it feels more firm. It's not quite as resilient as spring anymore, but it's more firm. That would imply a restriction. In this case, the restriction listing would be left rotation restriction of L3. The other contact that you have to create rotation, again, completely up to you, is I can contact the mammillary process of L3. Well, in this case, to assess left rotation, I want to be on the mammillary process on the right-hand side. and my line of drive relative to it would be relatively P to A. So to find this, I palpate, bisect the iliac crest to find the spinous of L4, palpate up one spinous process. From here, I go to the inner spinous space above L3 and then over lateral about 3/4 of an inch. Most people's thumbs are 3/4 of an inch, half an inch to 3/4 of an inch. So what I would recommend, so that you're not out in the paraspinal muscles or in the QLs for that things, literally from that inner spinous space, base jump the spinous process, just slip down past it. What you're going to do is compress the overlying musculature till you feel a little bit of, you flatten the muscles against the underlying bone. Since our line of drive is P to A, we want to take our body pretty much in a straddle stance right up over the patient. From here, reach around to the ASIS with your inferior hand and begin to rotate the pelvis. You'll know you're at pretension because what you'll feel is the mammillary process will rise up into your hand. As soon as you feel it rise up into your hand, you're at pretension. From here to feel end feel, we do one of three things. We either stabilize the pelvis and lightly spring 1/8 of an inch through our thumb contact, feeling the resiliency of the joint. We can stabilize the mammillary and pull a little bit farther with the pelvis, or you can do a combination of both. Either which way, you're using assessment of, in this case, left rotation of L3 using a mammillary process. The only difference between the two is you don't get to feel the movement between the segments as easily with the spinous process as you do with the mammillary process. With the mammillary process, you don't get that separation of feeling the actual two bones separate. That's going to be a rotation. Lateral bending, left lateral bending, in this case, is going to be L3 relative to L4. You have two choices. You can either utilize this table because this table can laterally bend the torso, or we can also laterally bend the pelvis, which will laterally bend the spine, by using the patient's leg, which I'll demonstrate in a second. In using the table, since the axis of the rotation of the table is right here at the lower border of this thoracic piece, we would like it that whichever segment you're assessing, which will be L3, L4 for the test, that you place this over the axis of the table. So I can bisect the iliac crest, find the spinous of L4, palpate superiorly one spinous to put me at 3. From here I look down at the table and I realize this patient, do me a favor, can I have you slide very slightly up the table just a little bit? I'd slide them up so that segment, in essence the inner space, is right over that lower border of this thoracic section. From here, we're going to use our inferior hand as going to be our contact. Once again, we're going to be on L3, but we're going to use the base of our thumb now to spy across the inner space on L4. Good doctor's position is probably to take a knee to protect my back. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach, there's a handlebar up on and over here, just below the cervical piece. I'm going to lift this handlebar up, and I'm going to laterally bend, in this case, for left lateral bending, the torso to my side. What you're going to feel, we have joint play and end play. The spine is always going to feel that it moves away from you, whether it's restricted or not, because the spine is bone. In normal joint play, what you should feel as you laterally bend them is you should feel that segment both move away but buckle as it does. That would be normal. There's movement between the two segments. In a restricted segment, you'll feel it move away, but it feels it moves away as one piece. Either which way, once I feel the spine moving away, there's so little motion in the lumbar spine that that's at that pretension stage right there. The only thing left to do is I'm going to lightly lean my body, springing into it from lateral to medial. What should you feel? In a normal joint, you should feel it buckle during joint play, and as you spring and feel, it should give a little bit more and then recoil out. In a restricted joint, you'll feel very little, if any, joint play, and when you spring, it won't be resilient when you spring through. It may or may not feel like it buckles at all. In which case, if that's what I found, this would be a left lateral bending restriction between L3 and L4. If you choose to use the leg, we put the patient in our normal position of shoulders off of the cervical piece. In essence, what we're going to do is we're going to laterally bend the pelvis and thus the spine by abducting the hip joint. So the first thing you want to do is you want to flex the patient's leg to 90 degrees. Since I don't want to carry the weight of a leg in my arm itself, I'm going to take my leg and put my knee up against the table. This other leg I'm going to place out here for my own balance. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to reach across and grasp the inside aspect of the patient's leg, and I'm going to slide it off of the table and make a sling between my hand and my leg. By leaning back on my heel, I can keep the weight of the leg on my leg. With my superior hand, I'm going to palpate, in this case, L3, but I'm going to spy on L4 just like we did beforehand. And from here, I'm just going to abduct the patient's hip, which will laterally bend the patient's pelvis, which will laterally bend the spine. What will you feel? The same thing we felt before. The spine will feel like it translates away from me, and as it translates away, it should buckle. If I don't feel it buckling, I have virtually no joint play. When you go to spring the joint, you may feel no resilience whatsoever, or at best minimal. A healthy joint, it'll buckle during joint play, and as you spring and then feel, it'll feel like it gives and it recoils. So once I take out the slack and bring the joint to pretension, I'm just going to lightly just spring from lateral to medial into that joint to assess its end feel. And that's lateral bending and rotation of the lumbar spine in a prone position.